They were laughing one moment and vanished the next. 5 young men headed to a basketball game. Hours later, their car was found on a frozen mountain road, intact, full of snacks, doors locked. Months later, their bodies turned up miles away, except one. The decisions they made and the ones they didn't make no sense. Stick around, because the deeper you go, the darker it gets. It was supposed to be a quick night out, a joyful prelude to a weekend the boys had looked forward to for months. February 24th, 1978, held no ominous warning signs for Jack Hewitt, Theodore Ted Weir, William Bill Sterling, Jack Madruga, and Gary Mathias. These 5 young men, best friends from Yuba City, California, had spent weeks practicing for their big game. The Gateway Gators, a basketball team for young adults with developmental disabilities, had been invited to a special Olympics tournament the next morning. The winners would be rewarded with a trip to Los Angeles. That prize meant everything to them. They weren't the kind of boys that have a perfect lifestyle. Each had their own challenges. Jack Hewitt struggled with social interaction. Ted Weir had a mild intellectual disability and was socially anxious. Bill Sterling was devoutly religious and tended toward introversion. Jack Madruga, a U.S. Army veteran, had been discharged for low cognitive aptitude, and Gary Mathias, the charismatic ringleader, battled schizophrenia but had stabilized on medication and even helped in his stepfather's gardening business. Together, they were joyful, bonded by their shared struggles and love of basketball. They laughed harder in each other's company, moved more confidently, and found strength in their brotherhood. That night, they decided to make a short trip to Chico, about 50 miles away, to watch their favorite college team, UC Davis, play. They promised their families they would be back in time for bed. No one doubted that promise. These boys were never reckless. They lived by routines, cherished plans, and abhorred the idea of letting anyone down, especially on a night before their long-awaited tournament. Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego, his prized turquoise and white car, carried them to the game. He was the only one with a license, and he took pride in his role. They were seen at the stadium, cheering, smiling, enjoying the game. Afterward, they stopped by a nearby gas station convenience store for snacks, sodas, milk, candy. The clerk remembered them clearly. They came in near closing time, disrupting his quiet end-of-shift routine. He didn't know it then, but he was the last person to ever see all 5 of them alive. When morning came and none of the boys returned home, panic settled over Yuba City like a slow-moving fog. Parents who had stayed up waiting by the window began calling each other. Every call confirmed the same horrifying fact. No one had seen their son. They hadn't come home. They hadn't called. They hadn't even shown up for the tournament. It was more than just unusual. It was unthinkable. Lieutenant Lance Ayers of the Yuba County Sheriff's Department took the case personally. He had gone to school with Ted Weir. These were local boys, innocent, vulnerable, and now they were missing. Ayers led the charge as authorities began a widespread search. Initially, there was nothing. No sign of an accident. No clue of foul play. No contact. Nothing. The days dragged on, and dread settled into every unanswered question. Then a breakthrough. A few days after the boys vanished, searchers located Jack Madruga's Montego abandoned on a desolate mountain road in Plumas National Forest, more than 70 miles northeast of Chico. That was nowhere near Yuba City. It was in the middle of nowhere, up a winding, snow-covered trail that climbed steeply into the forest. No one could explain why the boys had gone there. It made no sense. The car wasn't stuck. It wasn't out of gas. The keys were missing, but when officers hotwired it, it started without issue. The snow around the tires showed no sign of the car spinning out or struggling. The boys had driven there deliberately. They had parked neatly, then walked away. Inside the car were snack wrappers and empty cartons from the convenience store. Evidence that whatever happened afterward, they had enjoyed their snacks in the car. But the strangest part was that all the doors had been shut, one window left slightly open. The car was abandoned with eerie precision. No sign of panic. No clear direction of where they had gone next. The discovery of the car launched an intense manhunt across the frigid forest. Helicopters scanned the mountains. Search teams trudged through waist-deep snow, but then winter showed its cruelest face. A blizzard swept across the region, burying any potential tracks, clues, or bodies under several feet of snow. The search was called off. For weeks, the families waited, in agony, in silence. Spring slowly crept in, and with the melting snow came something darker. On June 4th, nearly 4 months after they vanished, a group of motorcyclists exploring the area stumbled across a trailer deep in the woods, 20 miles from where the Montego had been found. It was a Forest Service trailer, poorly maintained and forgotten. One of the windows had been smashed. The door creaked open, and the stench of death poured out. Inside, wrapped in 8 military blankets, was the corpse of Theodore Ted Weir. His feet were frostbitten and gangrenous, his body emaciated, a long beard grown over his sunken face. He had clearly survived for weeks, maybe as long as 13. Next to him were untouched food rations, enough to feed all 5 of them for months. Matches lay scattered across the floor. Books, firewood, clothing, even a propane tank, all of it unused. The tragedy wasn't just that Ted Weir had died. It was that he had died surrounded by everything he needed to survive. But none of it had been touched. Not a single fire had been lit. Not a bite of food eaten. No clothing changed. It was as if he had crawled into a tomb and waited to die. But Ted wasn't alone in this horror. A day later, a second discovery was made. About 11 miles from the car, searchers found the skeletal remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling, scattered by animal predation. Both had died of hypothermia. 2 days after that, another sad discovery was met. Bones belonging to Jack Hewitt were found 2 miles closer to the trailer. His cause of death, hypothermia. 4 of the 5 had been found, each one lost to cold and starvation. But one remained missing, Gary Mathias. To this day, no trace of Gary Mathias has ever been found. Only his tennis shoes were discovered, neatly placed inside the trailer beside Ted Weir's body. Outside the trailer, a quarter-mile away, was a neatly folded pile of blankets and a rusted flashlight, left as if someone had planned to return. Gary Mathias, the only one of the 5 who had military training, who knew how to survive in the wild, whose schizophrenia had been under control, had simply vanished. His disappearance only deepened the mystery. Why had they gone into the forest that night? Why would 5 boys drive 70 miles in the opposite direction of home, away from their beloved basketball tournament, into a snow-covered wilderness they didn't know? And once they were there, why abandon the working car with fuel still in the tank and no mechanical problems? Why hike uphill in the dark, through freezing temperatures, dressed in lightweight clothing with no supplies? Even more puzzling, why make it to a trailer stocked with food, heat, and blankets, only to let one of their closest friends slowly wither away in a cold room for 13 weeks? Why didn't they build a fire? Why didn't they eat? And what happened to Gary Mathias? Some speculated they had been fleeing someone or something. Others suggested a shared psychotic break, possibly triggered by Gary's schizophrenia. There was even talk of a sinister force in the woods, something malevolent. But the truth remains elusive. Even the most rational theories can't explain why 5 men with differing intellectual capacities, some more than capable of basic survival skills, made such a devastating series of choices, or whether they had a choice at all. The questions didn't end with the discovery of the trailer. In fact, they multiplied, each one darker than the last. Why had they hiked uphill through a snowstorm in total darkness for over 20 miles? The road they drove in on was icy and treacherous, but the path they chose on foot was even more so: steep, unforgiving terrain, forested and wild. These were not seasoned hikers. None of the 5 had any wilderness experience. The trail they followed was not marked, not known to locals, not part of any logical route. It led them deeper into isolation. And still, it wasn't the distance that unsettled investigators the most. It was the determination. There was no evidence they had turned around. No signs of hesitation. No circles or confusion in their path. Whatever took them up that mountain drove them forward with singular intent. They walked like men with a mission. But what was the mission? The trailer was locked when the motorcyclists found it, but one window had been smashed. That was likely how they had entered. Whoever broke that window must have had the strength to get inside. But once there, nothing else had been broken. No sign of struggle. No overturned furniture. No attempt to use the propane heater. No sign that anyone even looked around for help. It was as if they had simply entered and stopped. Lieutenant Lance Ayres, the man who had known Ted Weir since high school, wrestled with the implications. It didn't make sense. None of it. Ted Weir, wrapped in 8 military-style blankets, had somehow survived for nearly 3 months. But how had he gotten those blankets? Someone else must have placed them over him. He was too frostbitten, too weak to have done it himself. That meant at least one of the others had been alive in the trailer for a significant amount of time, possibly even weeks before dying or disappearing. Then came the detail that chilled Ayres to his core. Ted Weir had lost nearly 100 pounds. His feet were in such a horrifying state that bones protruded from the flesh. And yet, there was a locker in the trailer, not 6 feet from his deathbed, containing dozens of unopened C-ration cans. Military food designed to survive nuclear winters. Enough calories to keep a person alive for months. But they were untouched. The can opener was found nearby, unopened as well. Gary Mathias, having served in the army, would have known exactly how to use it. He would have known exactly what to do. That was why the presence of Gary Mathias's shoes in the trailer disturbed authorities so much. If Gary was there, he had survived at least part of the ordeal. And he hadn't been dead when the others died. His shoes were removed and left, implying that at one point, he felt safe enough to take them off. Perhaps he had even left in someone else's shoes, either to go find help or flee from something unspeakable. What haunts those who studied the case wasn't just the mystery of why. It was the nature of the how. There was no sign of violence, no blood, no external trauma, no signs of an animal harm, at least not before death. Even hypothermia, as an explanation, seemed unconvincing in the face of available shelter and supplies. It was as though logic itself had bent in those woods. Like the laws of survival had been suspended, one by one, until the men no longer fought to live. There were theories. There are always theories. Some believed that the group took a wrong turn, that they were trying to find their way home and simply got lost. But that explanation doesn't satisfy. They were 70 miles in the opposite direction. That's not a wrong turn. That's a decision. Others claim they may have picked up a hitchhiker after leaving the basketball game. Someone who panicked or frightened them, forced them off the road and into the wilderness. Maybe they thought they were being followed. Maybe Gary, suffering from a schizophrenic episode, became paranoid and convinced the others they had to flee into the night. Maybe it was Gary who led them into the forest. And maybe something happened inside that trailer that only he survived. Then there are those who whisper of something stranger. Unseen forces, government experiments, cosmic cruelty. There were reports, unconfirmed, dismissed as folklore, of a strange light seen in the mountains that night. Others spoke of low, rhythmic humming in the trees, as if the earth itself were groaning. Theories abounded about radiation, about military installations hidden in the forest, about phenomena that defied human comprehension. Some called it America's Dyatlov Pass, drawing parallels to the 1959 Soviet mystery where 9 hikers died under grotesque and unexplained circumstances. Some barefoot, some with crushed skulls, others with radioactive clothing, one missing her tongue. The similarities were hard to ignore. Both cases involved experienced groups suddenly lost, exhibiting strange behavior, turning away from safety toward death, leaving behind scenes that made no sense, half clues, half riddles. And in both cases, nothing ever really added up. In Yuba County, the community never recovered. Mothers never stopped crying. Fathers stopped speaking altogether. Ted Weir's mother refused to move his belongings, keeping his room just as it was. Jack Hewitt's father became reclusive and eventually passed away, still asking why his son had to die in the snow. Gary Mathias's family endured the endless echo of a missing person case with no closure, no grave to weep over, just a void where answers should be. The FBI got involved briefly. So did local psychics, amateur sleuths, journalists, and true crime fanatics. But all they found were cold trails, colder bodies, and a case that grew stranger with each passing year. Decades later, people still visit the site. They hike the mountain, walk the lonely road, peer into the shattered window of that cursed trailer. They look for something, anything, that will explain what happened on that February night. But all they find is silence. And that silence speaks louder than words. The most unsettling part of the Yuba County 5 case isn't what we know. It's what we almost know. So many things almost make sense. A wrong turn, paranoia, a moment of panic. But none of those theories account for the calmness of their movements. None explain why Ted didn't eat. None explain why the car was parked so carefully. Why no one tried to light a fire. Why Gary Mathias walked into the forest and never came back. To this day, the official cause of death for 4 of the 5 is hypothermia. That's the neat box the coroner used. But in the minds of those who've studied the case, hypothermia was merely the final chapter of a longer, stranger book. One written in whispers and contradictions, in snow prints that melted before they could be followed, in unanswered prayers and frostbitten limbs. A case so baffling, so haunting, it earned a name that evokes terror on the other side of the world. America's Dyatlov Pass. Why do you think they left the car? Why didn't they eat the food? What really happened to Gary Mathias? Was it fear? A shared psychosis? Or something stranger watching from the trees? Drop your theories in the comments. We want to hear what you think. And if unexplained disappearances and true stories that defy logic fascinate you, subscribe for more. Some mysteries aren't meant to stay buried.